Welcome everyone. I'm getting kicked out every few minutes, so I will make it short. I will check the participants and also now back again.
Maybe you should not use another browser.
Yeah, I'm going to do that. So you start your presentation, and I will take your time, and I hope to be back to see something about your presentation.
No worries, I'll kick off. All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm here together with my colleague of Vito, the Flemish Research Institute, Wim de Bakker, to tell you something about the Flemish Living Lab on circular construction. Wouldn't it be great to live in a city where buildings have a positive effect on welfare, well-being, and the natural environment, with buildings that do not emit greenhouse gases, buildings that are of healthy materials, and that can adapt to changing needs of users in our society? Maybe you think that's still a far-fetched dream that we're all, well, big part of it is already happening. Just maybe browse to reber.world and you will find real life examples of some niche activities. Unfortunately, current building practice is still far away, as we know, from this ideal picture. Like in the rest of Europe, also the Flemish built environment is characterized by assets that cannot easily adapt to changing needs and requirements, with the consequences that we know. But like any persistent challenge, the transition from a linear to a circular construction economy requires systemic changes. To divert from the current practices that maintain the take, make, waste logic, we need new ways of doing and organizing and new ways of thinking within the value network of construction, like we've heard already this morning. All too often, actors point to each other saying there is no demand as well as there is no offer, failing to see the bigger picture that they are part of and that connects them, and so grasp rich, enduring changes of their own practices, structures, and beliefs are necessary to transform together to a more sustainable equilibrium. Exactly, therefore, in search of those enduring changes, there is the Flemish Living Lab on circular construction. This lab is a 3.5-year project of research and real-life experiments initiated by the regional governmental transition hub Circular Flanders. The Living Lab on circular construction, or in Dutch proeftuin circulair bouwen, is one of the youngest policy initiatives of Circular Flanders, and its ultimate goal is to develop, based on those experiments and on systemic research more behind the screens, policy and practice-oriented way to accelerate eventually the transition. Our design for an organization of the lab as facilitators is characterized by a strong co-creation process supported by system analysis and experimentation. One key component, which I want to talk about today, of the Living Lab is therefore the Compass Group, here in the center of this scheme. The Compass Group is really the driving force as it determines which research issues should be addressed and which experiments must be carried out to further accelerate the transition to a circular economy in construction. The group is composed of 16 forerunners, ambassadors, and out-of-the-box thinkers of the construction sector in Flanders who have expertise or experience and a strong interest in circular building and hold vast knowledge of the sector's everyday practice. It includes contractors, architectural designers, as well as manufacturers, policymakers, and researchers. And they are supported by their reflection on the transition by us, the researchers and facilitators, who adopt deliberately a participatory systems thinking approach. During 4 workshops between September 2019 and May 2020, the Compass Group first fine-tuned its own objectives and tasks, and drafted some guiding principles for how it would operate. And subsequently, based on the insights from their own everyday practice, but very diverse practices, they have been identifying together the most important system hurdles, necessary changes, as well as leverage opportunities for achieving a circular economy. And they did so in the way we facilitated them in different steps, continuously system analysis, translating it into insights and also reflecting about those lessons learned. At the moment, we are about halfway of the co-creation process, and we have been implementing various practical formats and frames, sometimes very simple ways of working and sometimes very advanced ones. And I'll give you 2 examples. During the first and second workshop, we've been asking our Compass group members some straightforward questions. What bugs them every time they want to change the current practice, which limits they bump into, or which opportunities they already discovered. All their answers were listed and categorized according to the systemic iceberg model. Besides events and trends, obvious things that are above the water surface, more structural issues and mental models became apparent too. For example, the lack of reliable information on buildings, and short-term profit being more valuable or valued higher than qualitative craftsmanship, which are under the water level. The result of this mapping is the identification of 5 system hurdles. Behind the easily cited demand and offer deadlock, as I already introduced, 5 interlinked hindrances are slowing down the transition of the Flemish construction sector. The 2 first ones at the left explain why the demand is limited. For example, number 1, most decisions and specifically investments are based on a short-term cost-benefit consideration fed by unbridled consumption and growing individualism. And number 4, few building clients and users are actually aware of, or they don't find guarantees for the positive effect of circular building choices on the environment or society. 3 other hurdles affect mainly the supply side of the circular building. Number 2, for example, building practitioners rarely select unconventional, innovative solutions to avoid risks, because the risk aversion is fed by an unclear political vision today and fierce competition. Number 3, there is also little trust and collaboration between the actors of the value network, which results in a lack of insights in the whole life cycle of the building and of the building products. And number 5, there's boundless diversity in the construction and real estate market, certainly in Flanders, which makes it very difficult to replicate solutions, both technical as well business-wise. So with these hurdles in mind, we finally understood the real illness of the system, and we wanted to build further on. Therefore, the second example, during the third workshop, we challenged the Compass group members by asking them which measures they would implement if they would take up the office of the Minister of Circular Construction. We've asked them to relate then these measures with output parameters, expectations, and if they will raise or decline. And by doing so, this small exercise, they acquired actually some basic knowledge of drafting causal loop diagrams. Such a causal loop diagram is one way of system modeling that shows and makes tangible the connections between the effects and their origin. And at first, their answers of the Compass group members were focusing on economic measures, such as imposing circular targets through public procurement and taxing non-circular products. We all know those ideas. But when digging further into why such measures have not been working as expected so far, we discovered that many unwanted feedbacks and underlying principles. And when we link all those feedbacks together in loops, it was possible to make some promising change measures made explicit. The results are 15 potential actions that were co-identified as a means to break into the current system of construction. And during the last and fourth workshop, these leverages have been mapped and clustered by the members as a kind of validation according to their estimated impact and difficulty to implement. By doing so, it was possible to set priorities. For example, some actions could be easily met, like making lifecycle costing mandatory in public procurements. Other actions are more demanding, such as creating alternative financing for circular building solutions with added value for all stakeholders. Yet the co-identified opportunities are just a stepping stone to really tangible field-based experiments in the Living Lab, who must eventually demonstrate how barriers can be overcome and material loops will be closed. For this step and for this purpose, Circular Flanders and OVAM, together with the Proeftuin Living Lab, launched a call in the fall of last year, a targeted call for experiments with a total budget of 2.8 million euros. These grants of up to 80% and 100,000 euros per experiment have been awarded by the end of that year to 29 of the 75 partnerships of local authorities, enterprises, and research institutes that together submitted their ideas for experiments. And in conclusion, to bring together forerunners, ambassadors, and out-of-the-box thinkers of the construction sector with expertise on circular building and insight in the sector's everyday practice, our Compass group co-creating together, it was possible to co-create together systemic hurdles, necessary changes, and leverage actions. So it's a kind of demonstration how a well-guided Compass group allows to bring into practice participatory system modeling, and by consequently also translating the outcomes and their insights into the requirements for targeted call for experiment, it is further demonstrated that the created knowledge has been really actionable for the policymakers of Circular Flanders and OVAM, who triggered 75 partnerships to submit their ideas. The story is far from over, but my time is out. I can only thank once again all the members of the Compass Group and our research partners, and I'm looking forward to your questions and remarks.
Thank you, Waldo, for your interesting presentation. I missed a little some things, but it was interesting what I saw. So we leave the questions till the end, and now I want to give the floor to Marijn van der Weijer from Zuid University.
Thank you. Chair, can you warn me if I'm 2 minutes away from the, how do you say that, the end?
Yes, I'm going to try that.
Okay, thank you.
I'm in, if I'm still in, because I was kicked out 6 times. So.
Okay. Anybody else in the speaker list is also welcome to stop me.
I'll set the timer.
Good luck.
Thank you. Okay. I'm using the platform here. You see now all the slides, right? Now how do I make them? No, that's not right. Wait, I'm going to share the screen. I think that's easier.
Well, you choose full screen now, and then you have the whole. And people can use the arrows to clap down to the right and left, the drawing and the overview.
Okay. No. Okay, so now this is full screen, like this, you see it?
Yeah, for me it is.
Okay. Well, then let me start. So my name is Marijn van der Weijer, and I've also been contributing to the Super Local project, the Super Circular Estate project, which luckily you have had the opportunity to get introduced to a little bit in the previous session also. There have been a lot of monitoring actions during that process by Zuid University of Applied Sciences, and I'm going to take you a little bit into the social acceptance monitoring and exploration that we implemented. So societal acceptance is often discussed in terms of the end user, and we're talking about a social housing district that is the topic of this study that transformed from a site with 400 high-rise apartments to what it is now, as you have seen in the Super Local project, a flat with some apartments and land-based houses. But the tenants have been moved out, obviously, before demolition, but also before the Super Local project actually took shape. So this societal acceptance that we tried to implement here in the process was less addressing the tenant than other social actors in this process. So this is to show you a bit also the process of how it's going. The process of transforming a site of 400 apartment buildings in four big buildings, sorry, with 400 apartments, to what it is now, as you see here in the center, a renovated, partly renovated flat and low-rise housing being built. This is a previous design, so the ambitions have been changing a little bit, but still there are 3 test dwellings and 15 new social housings. So since it was not possible to get in the tenants, they also have been interviewed beforehand by several architectural companies to get a feeling of what this society, how this community looked at its environment, at its qualities, etc. And now, over the past project, we have had the opportunity to also monitor with other parties getting involved in the project. So we're talking about the professionals, all the experts that have been involved, civil servants, housing corporation professionals, building professionals, design professionals, on the one hand. The second hand, as it was also explained in the plenary session just before this one, the neighborhood, people that live in the surrounding area. And thirdly, also people that have been very much interested in visiting the process, visiting the project to see what's going on, to learn about circular building, such as students, policymakers, other experts, etc. So these were 3 groups that we saw opportunities with to learn about societal acceptance of circular building solutions. And this was also a thankful project in that sense, as we been working in monitoring that. Also early on, buildings were built. So we have, for example, the pavilion, an expo building that was already built quite early, which you see a detailed image here, which shows what was the one of the central questions is like, how are people going to accept this very experimental way of building? As you see in this detailed photo, it explains a bit of how all kinds of materials that were harvested from the high-rise buildings that were demolished come together in a new building, in a new way, sometimes very recognizable, like the tiles that were being reused, the balconies, the banisters that were being reused, but also sometimes very unrecognizable or maybe in a estranged manner of materials that that were once on the inside and were implemented on the outside, from exterior to interior, and vice versa, from ceiling to floor, etc. So there was a lot of experimentation also that we could discuss, evaluate, and monitor with these people. So to repeat again, we did this with 3 kinds of parties, with the involved experts, with the neighbors, and with a wider audience. And I would like, and that's why I emphasize it, to look at the perspective of neighbors now primarily. Due to the limited time, I can only address one of the groups in depth. So I chose the neighbors because I have the most questions and discussion points there that I would also like to hear your opinion about. We did some further experimentation also with experts, of course, during the monitoring. With a wider audience, it became a bit more difficult also because of the COVID situation, so some experiments couldn't be implemented. But we did something with the neighbors. And I will go into that now. As was also explained in the plenary session, there was a steering committee, a soundboard, as we call it in the Netherlands, of local residents homeowners that live in the neighborhood that we were first approaching to get an idea of what's going on in the neighborhood. Based on discussions with them, we moved on to a more qualitative kind of survey among neighbors, very informal interviews with surrounding inhabitants that were done during a neighborhood event when all people come together at the site, and we could discuss how they perceive the project at that moment. The intention was to develop it to a quantitative survey after that, based on those responses, which didn't work completely well, but I will try to explain a bit about it. What we discussed with these neighborhoods with the neighbors firstly in a qualitative approach was how they perceive it, and which is of course a lot about their nuisances also. It was about a project that was going on, that was experimental, that brought in a lot of dirt, of debris lying there, which was also central to their discussions. What also stood out, interestingly, is that that many neighbors didn't really focus a lot on the core values of sustainability, of recycling, of circular building, but are more concerned about livability, about the quality of public use, of public facilities, etc. Not so much about the social housing either. There was also, we noticed, what I noticed particularly was that there were some concerns about the professionality and about the expertise that was behind the project, also the use of the finances, since it came from public funding. We tried to further interrogate that with a qualitative survey. We implemented an online research, which did not, unfortunately, did not receive enough response. We tried to test if these behaviors, understanding and knowledge of the project, importance given to it, and also the confidence in the involved parties were representative. We only found, I only found, based on the response, that there was confirmation of the fact that there was limited interest in the core values and more interest in the use of public space, of how that would be filled in, and a little bit less confirmation of confidence in the involved parties. I think I'm almost out of time, Wendy.
Yeah, I give you a minute.
Okay. I will try to bring it back and tie it back into also to conclude into the well, overarching observation, which I think is the core, and maybe this is a big leap, but we feel that centrally is the question of the narrative of circular building, whether it should be very visible or not, whether it should be hidden, and proving that you can reach the same quality of circular building as with regular building, or in expressing it very clearly and stating like this is circular building, which we found many tensions between professional experts, between visitors and inhabitants. Well, I think then due to the limit, I have to stop. Yeah, yeah, thank you. I will leave it at that then.
Maybe have you a final conclusion?
Okay. Well, the final conclusion to me was, I think that we're trying to look at a higher level of participation to bridge these gaps, or to bridge these different perspectives between inhabitants, experts, and also to use that as a vehicle for implementing this research, as we found many issues in getting people interested in joining this qualitative and quantitative researches. So I think from this co-creative or co-design process or participative processes, you could get a better level of response. And this is what we like to explore in future projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Marijn, for the presentation. I would like to move on to the presentation of Stéphane from the University of Liège. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope you can see the presentation.
I can, so probably the rest can too.
I guess everyone else can too. Yeah, thanks. So hi, everyone. My name is Stéphane Monfils. I'm from the University of Liège, as Wendy just said. This paper results from a postdoctoral stay with Dr. Anne-Marie van Zyl-Hoselma at Maastricht University, where we studied the enabling environments that are needed in order to accelerate condominium energy retrofitting. And this paper presents 2 case studies in Grenoble and in Brussels. Okay. This research took part in the Interreg Northwest Europe ACE retrofitting research project, in which the consortium tried to design a method and governance framework to overcome the legal, human, and financial barriers that are currently hindering energy retrofitting of condominiums. There's a vast stock of energy inefficient buildings in Europe, as we all know, and condominiums are a particular challenge in the strategies designed to tackle climate change, because there's a need for collective decision making, which appears, I'm sure, quite complex to all of you when it comes to energy retrofitting. And there's also an important diversity among stakeholders and decision makers in terms of age, education, income, interests, perceptions, which of course makes it very difficult to agree on a common project. On the other hand, it was necessary to try and federate the supply side, so the building professionals, as the retrofitting of entire condominium blocks involves a range of professions and skills, and the private sector needs to work together to provide high quality and economically viable works. And finally, it was important in this project to link demand and supply side in a new governance model, which was facilitated by cities, which are the key facilitators and drivers within a territory. The objectives of Maastricht University Sustainability Institute were to develop an understanding of the enabling environment that led to a retrofitting project of specific condominiums. And the enabling environment is generally understood as a set of interrelated conditions that impacts the potential to bring about sustained and effective change. In this case, of course, the capacity of co-owners to engage in energy retrofitting. And according to the literature, the 4 main pillars in this enabling environment are policy, finance, capacity building and internal organization, and socio-cultural acceptance. So part of the project consisted on the analysis of a great number of case studies with the intent to shed a light onto success stories and to stimulate potential candidates to condominium retrofit. So we selected case studies based on a number of important characteristics. They had, of course, to be co-owned buildings, and they should be within the Northwest region of Europe, and they should have reached a decision to at least deeply renovate the building. Here you can see on the left the Manival condominium near Grenoble, and on the right the Expo 1 condominium in Brussels. Details on both can be found in the paper, of course. In order to understand the interrelations of personal and external factors, we use the social ecological model, which is based on ecological systems theory and is designed to understand the dynamic interactions between individual and environmental factors that determine behavior. And as you can see, we found 5 scales that we identified inside condominiums, with at the core the individual level, which includes the homeowners and the other dwellers of the condominiums. Then we have the interpersonal level, represented by the community of co-owners with shared interests in the building. Then we have the organizational level, which can be seen in different bodies, for instance, the property managers and the condominium board, or even the architects. And then we have the community level, which is represented by officials and services of the municipality. and the societal level with higher administrative levels of society, such as legislators. So we managed to organize interviews with representatives of all those levels for both case studies. And we organized focus groups with those representatives. The table here gives you an idea of the topics that were discussed during those 2 to 2.5 hour semi-structured interviews. The discussion was organized in renovation project phases, so the before, during, and after retrofit, although I might add that in both cases, the projects were not finished at the time, so the after retrofit was a bit hard to interview. We discussed key stakeholders and challenges and decision-making processes and important information, crucial moments, advice and lessons they wanted to share. And of course, before the retrofit, we were also interested in the reasons and incentives to start the project. And of course, there was an overarching topic, which was the funding and the discussion on the financing scheme. Findings are presented in relation to the 4 pillars of the enabling environment. They are quite hardly summarized here, so please go to the full paper for more details. Policies, of course, are enabling factors that are implemented at the higher level of the social ecological model, so the community and society levels, but have direct impact at lower levels, the organizational and interpersonal levels. At society level, you'll find laws, of course, such as those that dictate the condominium's legal status, or the required vote for important decision-making process. For example, the decision to implement deep retrofit needs 50% of votes in France, but 66% in Belgium, and it used to be 75%, so we already had a breakthrough there. At the community level, we can find local policies to enforce global plans targeting ambitious environmental objectives and to provide significant budgets to make them possible. And at the organizational level, you'll find, for example, the condominium's internal rules, like the governance structure inside the condo, which are crucial to organize the decision-making process. Of course, there's a crucial need for the availability of interesting financing schemes, which can come from various levels, from the society level through laws, from the community level through incentive mechanisms, and from the organizational level through banks. Loans, of course, are important, especially collective loans, in this case, that are made available to anyone without any discrimination on age, medical history, or existing financial debts. And in both case studies, there were no life or income insurance involved, which made them interesting for older people also. And in Belgium, the loan was backed up by the Atradius insurance, which covers all the co-owners of the building, not only the ones participating in the collective loan, against those who do not pay their share of the project. It had the benefit to comfort, of course, all the co-owners that they would not be held responsible for others. It simplified the work of the building manager, and it reassured the bank on the reimbursement scheme. In addition to the loan, of course, are other schemes like the green certificates, the tax deductions, and the subsidies, which decrease the amount to be financed by co-owners, even more so for vulnerable people. And the main problem, of course, is that often they are made only available after completion of the works, which was quite a problem in most cases. An interesting fact was that in Brussels, the renovation of the roof was paid for by telecom providers in exchange for 9 years free rent for the antennas they placed on the roof. And of course, the next pillar is the capacity, the building of capacity. So enabling the renovation of condominiums also implies the necessity to use or to build capacity. At the community levels, we can find the professionals which are acting as enablers, helping co-owners to define the technical and financial aspects of the project. At the organizational level are those with the skills to answer owners' questions and complaints, and at the individual and interpersonal levels is the team of insiders, such as the condominium board, which were an essential link between the owners and the professionals, with a fundamental role in helping to manage and convince the General Assembly of co-owners to lead discussions, to lead debates in a civil and constructive manner, and finally to reach an agreement in time for the vote to start the project. So early engagement inside the condominium meant that the much needed social cultural acceptance at the lower levels, the individual and interpersonal levels of the social ecological model, tended to be increased by a guidance by skilled, motivated, and dynamic professionals. also by time that was given to the owners to let them appropriate the project, ponder the consequences, ask questions, get information, assimilate and understand. By the fact that the renovation project remained a voluntary decision, a process which did not feel forced on any of the owners. By the opportunity effect, so the fact that existing schemes allowed condominiums to jump on the wagon and benefit from guidance, skills and information, and by existing knowledge snowball effect, where exemplar projects became inspiration for others to engage in the process. So in conclusion, I would just say that first, mobilization and motivation of all the actors, especially at the individual, interpersonal and organizational levels, was crucial to the advancement of the renovation projects. Then guidance requires many important qualities that are crucial to find and that are listed here and are sometimes very difficult to find in someone. There's a need for efficient, frequent and transparent communication, which leads to essential trust between all stakeholders and a sensation to belong to a team that spoke the same language, so that the condo did not feel abandoned, confused or pressured. And the financing scheme, of course, is important, but a missing piece that has been mentioned is public investment as well as legal obligation at the society level. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Stéphane, for your interesting presentation. I'm still in, so I can hear it the whole presentation. Thank you very much. So if you have any questions for Stéphane, please let us know in the chat. And I would like to give the floor to Charlottte for the last presentation of this session. I will unmute you. Oh, you have to unmute yourself, Charlottte. I cannot do that. Just click the microphone. Oh no! What an easy to use platform. Oh my God. Now she's gone. Charlottte. Maybe you are in the audience.
Yeah, is it working?
Yeah, now it's working. Great, thank you.
It didn't work. I will share my... Yeah. Can you see this?
I saw it and now it's gone.
Yeah, indeed. A second. Yeah, this should be it. Okay.
Great.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Charlottte Cambier, and I will present you a reflective study on the circular retrofit lab. This project was finished in 2019, so the study is more set up to learn from the project. I will start with some background information about the project and which design decisions were made, and also their underlying drivers. And then I will also share some lessons learned from the multiple partners in the project. So the Circular Retrofit Lab, or the CRL, was one of the case studies of the Buildings as Material Banks BAMP project of Horizon 2020 Europe project. It concerned the refurbishment of 8 student houses at the VUB campus. These are the yellow square and the red circle. So there are 8 student houses, and in total on the campus there are about 350 of those student houses. So the main aim of this CRL project was actually to integrate circularity principles, such as designing with reversible connections, and that can be implemented in a retrofitting project. A second important aspect of this project was the architectural value of it. The student houses were designed by the famous architect Willy van der Meeren and were built out of his famous Variel system, which are the concrete modules which serve as structure here. And then third, this project was that this project and the solutions were not only developed by the architect, but actually with a whole team of multiple partners already from the beginning of the design process. As we call it, early multidisciplinary approach. So this brought, of course, many advantages, but also some disadvantages, which I will talk about later. And as this project finished in 2019, we can now reflect on it and we can learn from it. And maybe we can upscale it to the other 350 student houses on campus and maybe to other refurbishment projects in Brussels, Flanders, and even wider. So first, it's questions how these three factors that I have named now have influenced the design choices. And to limit the scope, I will only focus on the facade design of the CRL. So the facade design, the structure of the facade is, of course, the concrete structure that is reused that I showed earlier. So here you see it stripped. And then some panels are mounted on it. And these panels, these facade panels, are modular, prefabricated, and also demountable. They differ, so there are different types of panels, and they differ here in window presence and window size, but there are more facade panels as well, but I will focus on these now. So this is how they were delivered on site and also installed on site. You can see it here. And they consist actually of a wooden frame with in it an aluminium window frames or insulation capsuled with two wooden boards at each side. So, and when they are installed, they are covered with a yellow covering as facade cladding, which you will see not on these pictures, but there will come another picture of it. Yeah, so then we will move on to the design decisions, and even when only focusing on the facade, there were even 10 unusual design decisions that could be identified. And these are design decisions that are not common in other building projects. I will show 2 of them. There are 10 of them, but you can read about it in the full paper, of course. So the first one is insulation at the inside of the structure. So the architectural value of the concrete structure had as a consequence that the facade panels were installed inside the concrete structure, inside instead of at the outside. And this demanded special attention to fulfill the energy requirements. And even if not all the thermal bridges could be avoided here, it was the continuity of the insulation is there, and yeah, it was maximized to optimize still the building performance. So here you can see what I mean by the architectural value. So the CRL, as you can see that the left with the facade cladding, and at the right you see the original student houses. So in a common building project, of course, the structure would have been capsuled to avoid thermal bridges. A second uncommon design choice was to make the joints easily accessible. This is a consequence of the circularity principles, to simplify the maintenance and the installation and demounting process. And also without, if you demount it or install it without damaging the nearby elements as well. This has also as a consequence that the connections are still visible. As you can see here on the facade cladding, the bolts are still visible. And in other, or mostly, the facade elements would have been glued and the connections wouldn't be visible. That's also what Marijn mentioned in his presentation, I think, if circularity is visible or hidden. I will skip this one. So in total, there are about 10 of those design decisions, and they can all be related to the 3 aspects here. So the most are, of course, related to circularity because it was the main aim of the project as well. 4 of them are related to the architectural value, and only 2 of them to the multidisciplinary approach. And then we also did a reflexive learning or a history workshop to actually grasp what the learned lessons were. So we made a time map, which you see here on the ground, quite chaotic, but this is the cleaned digital version. And what you see here in green are the positive experiences, in red the negative experiences, and in blue the insights. So in the beginning of the process, there were mainly positive experiences, and the first ones are related to that it's considered as positive to establish a valuable network in circular buildings. So it was really seen as an opportunity to learn from each other, to bring all the knowledge together, and to start from there on circularity as well, to experiment together. But towards the end of the process, there was, of course, the negative experience linked to time pressure. So it was delivered too fast. There was not enough time to validate and to investigate. And this can be the result of two causes. This should still be further investigated. But for example, it can be the result of the technical complexity that arises by integrating circularity principles, because actually they're added to a long list of design principles that should be implemented anyway, like acoustics, thermal comfort, fire prevention, and so on. The second possibility is because of the early collaboration. You can see it here. The first design phases are extended actually because all the technical knowledge is brought to the beginning of the process. And then the last design phases are becoming a little bit cramped, and the deadline is coming short. So there's more time pressure towards the end of the design process. But these time-related experience should be further investigated. And then maybe the most important one is the positive experiences after the completion of the project. So many partners agreed that the project is really a trigger for taking further steps in circular economy and to innovate further in their projects or in their products, which is already happening actually. So some of the partners are innovating and are taking further steps to make their products demountable, for example, or to focus on digitalization and in better preservation of information. So to conclude, do I still have some time? Yes. To conclude, the study has shown that the involvement of the various partners and the circularity requirements actually increase the complexity of the project, but also that it offers a lot of learning opportunities for all the partners involved. And as a last thing, I would like to say that the other student houses on the campus are strict today, and that we hope that we can experiment further with them. And finally, at the end, to give them back to the students or to the VUB community as student housing or as a cafe or a restaurant, at least, if they are allowed to reopen again, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte, for your interesting contribution. Nice to see what you're doing there. I see René's also joined us. We have both had some difficulties to join, but it's working for now, so we can start the Q&A. We already had some questions in the chat, so I suggest that we start with the questions for Waldo. I'll scroll a little bit. Yeah, I think there was a question from Nuran that you mentioned both participatory process and co-creation. What do you think is the difference between them, and how can you define co-creation?
Yeah, I would not want to over theorize the meaning of all the words. I think what we need, and it was also mentioned in the morning, if we really want to make that our results as researchers are useful for practitioners, then we need to involve them in creating them, and not only create knowledge from behind our desk, but create knowledge together with them. And that's what I would call co-creation. And to do that, you need to start engaging with them, interacting with them, and having them participating in your research tasks, analyzing the system, in defining interventions. When they participate in it, then I think you can create or co-create new knowledge. So I would not theorize further than that.
Okay, thank you. I think that's clear. We also had an additional question from René. I don't think his speaker is working, so I will I will tell him. Now, are you able to give lessons for the use of reflexive participatory transition approaches about do's and don'ts? The proposals for systematic change I find to be not very actionable, and for institutional work you need a clear proposal for institutional change. Change is a little bit of René's expertise. So
absolutely, interesting question as well, and actually 2 questions, and Wim can complement on mine. First, lessons learned. There are a lot of success factors that are important. For example, giving feedback fast to the people who you're working with is very important. Also, balancing equivalent contribution of all the participants who you're working with is very important to keep the dynamic high. We identified 14 more of those qualities of the participatory process together with the theory. That's for another conference of publication. And on the second question about how actionable is this already, I think Wim and I fully agree that just the input for a project call of a call for experiment is not too actionable yet. It's not framed in an institutional way as who can do what. But of course, we are still amid participatory learning cycle, and I skipped this slide, but we are following this loop of learning where we started from their practices, identified what would be necessary, creating some room for experimentation. But now the next step is to follow up those experiments, learn from it on a systemic way again, and then translate it in much more concrete interventions or possibilities for Circular Flanders and the different ministries who are connected to that. So we definitely have still some work to do on that level.
Yeah, I see René is nodding, so I hope that will answer his question. I think if there are no additional questions for Waldo, we can also come back later, but then maybe we can go to the paper of Marijn. I'm scrolling to see what the questions were there. There are some questions about your sample. Did you read them?
Yeah, there were some questions about which group I actually involved. So I assume that this is about the neighbors, since that's what I've been talking about. Well, I worked via the soundboard, the steering committee. So they are all owner inhabitants of that neighborhood. So they own a house. I think there's that's the biggest group left there, since all the tenants were moved out somewhere else. So the social housing inhabitants. So I think this made it also a bit one-dimensional. You only have the viewpoint of the owners. There were still some tenants, but it was very hard to reach them. Maybe that's because they're not so not so interested in getting in engaging in those discussions. And sometimes you also see that if the owners have a large voice, then they are relatively more silent. So most of them is the owners, and then we had we reached out to them in the for the quantitative survey via all the channels of the project, like the newsletter, the Facebook websites, etc., reaching about 500 households approximately in the environment. And we had a disappointing response of about 25 of them that answered to the survey. So that was really limited. And I feel that in a future project, there is a need for another kind of approach of getting them involved. To me, the qualitative approach was more productive.
Yeah, but how many interviews did you do there, or it was the klankbordgroep, the sound?
No, no, there the steering committee invited me to their own their own organized party, and they suggested that I do it very informally. So I cooperated on that with them, and there were about let me see, 23 people out of 60 that I could interview. So 23 homeowners. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Scrolling to the. Yeah, René didn't have a question, but had a remark to. Maybe you read it already.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting.
Make a distinction between acceptance as a communication issue and acceptance as an issue for design thinking. Yeah.
Very interesting ideas. It's something I need to think about and explore a bit further, because this is very, this goes quite deep, and I'm curious to look into more literature or topics about that could explain or help me in that direction a bit further.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I think we can move on for the question for, I think, Stéphane.
Yes, if you don't mind, I'll give Anne-Marie van Zel-Josema some speaker rights so she can.
Yes, if you can do that,
that
would be great. Because I did manage.
There she is.
Hi, Anne-Marie. Yeah, I'm scrolling through the questions. I saw one.
Yes. There was.
Yeah, your work covers a question from Marijn. Your work covers interviews with actors from several hierarchical levels. How did you tailor questions to different groups, and how did you compare findings of the different levels with each other again?
Yeah, well, actually, the groups were interviewed together during one-shot focus group. So they were all together in one room. So we designed the interviews and questionnaires accordingly. Of course, there were questions that were mostly targeted to one audience more than another. For example, the funding scheme was preferably for people from the financing bodies. Yeah, it was important to us to also evaluate the interactions between them to see where they agreed and disagreed and what was the collective answer, so to say, and eventually allow them to oppose different views. So the questions were calibrated to be able to do that. I don't know if it answers.
Yeah, and did you also, because in a focus group, you can also experience certain tensions or maybe different points of views of interests. For your main conclusions about that?
Yeah, well, what was quite interesting, and I was a bit bewildered to see how much they agreed on everything in both cases. They were, especially in France, they were quite happy to say that they had no problems at all. Everything went smoothly, everyone agreed, and everything was really a great experience. So maybe we should have interviewed them a bit earlier in the process, and we might have seen something that was not going so smoothly. But it was quite a surprise, I have to say.
Yeah, and the same experiences in the I think the Netherlands and
in Brussels.
Brussels.
Yeah. Yeah, it was quite the same. Yeah, I don't recall any important disagreement. Anne-Marie, I don't know if you.
Yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, good. Well, one case that was not presented now because due to COVID we haven't managed to finalize it is the case in the Netherlands, and there was some disagreements because one of the co-owners was what we call in Dutch a huisjesmelker, and he did not want to invest any money at all whatsoever. So there was among the co-owners there was disagreement. Actually, what we see is that I think during the process of decision making, very often the co-owners, they have different perspectives. And then in these projects, because they were all retrofitting, they came to a positive conclusion. But also what we saw in all the other case studies we did in the ACE project, some buildings do not get towards that point where they start a retrofitting because there are so many disagreements.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I also have a question from René for you. Did you also investigate the degree of learning in the project? And I think he means the degree of learning of the people involved in the project, not the project employees, but the tenants, the condominium owners.
Well, if I may, Stéphane, it was what we did is we selected 2 case studies, and they were not followed by us throughout the whole process. These were case studies that we found that had indeed moved towards this stage of retrofitting. And I can assure you, there are not yet that many buildings in that phase in Europe. So we could not go to a before and after comparison. What I can only say is, no, we did not specifically look at the learning, but one of the elements that we saw in all condominiums that we talked to that was very important is that there are good examples of other condominiums so that people can indeed see what it means and that they can learn together. And another thing that Stéphane also mentioned in the presentation was it is extremely important to take your time in this process so that people can start to feel ownership of the whole process, that they feel it's voluntary, it's not something that is pushed on them, and that they can really fully understand what is going on.
Yeah.
Yes. The snowball effect I mentioned was quite important because as Anne-Marie just said, they were really learning from other people's experience. And in some cases, they mentioned some personal growth, let's say, some personal learning curve on some aspects. But it was interesting to see that in many cases, the people who were involved in the process were already knowledgeable about the construction problem and business and markets, and they were not complete neophytes going into the project, and that's also something that helped them get through it, I think.
And maybe a quick note regarding the multiple value creation that René is asking about. There's what we see in most of these processes is that there are many different aspects of many different types of benefits mentioned during such a decision-making process. So it's about comfort, it's about the energy bill, it's about increased safety, it's about noise reduction. So there are many different things.
Yeah. I'm going through his other questions. Did you use a participatory design methods based on that was a question about multiple creation thinking, but did you use a method for that, for organizing the focus groups, for instance?
No, I don't think so. I'm just trying to see the question in the chat. What we saw is that there was no the retrofit in itself was not really a participatory method. It was in the way that it was mainly, I think, obvious that they needed and they wanted a technical assistant team that could propose solutions that were acceptable, and they interacted at different stages. But it's like a typical retrofit system in which the client is a group of people and not a single person. But in other way, I don't think there was quite a participatory method in the retrofit project.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Do you want something to add, Annemarie?
No, thank you very much.
Okay. Looking at the time, I would like to move on for the questions for Charlottte. Scrolling through the questions. Wait. Yes, there's a question from Nuran. She asks, you are focused on the building facade scale. What about the site and site scale and connections to the infrastructure, for example?
Yeah, so in the beginning of the design process, the architects did a scenario planning about the functions in the building, and that was based on the activities on the campus. So it's possible to turn it into, I think, guest rooms and also destination space. So there, the site and the site and the users were taken into account. I see that my colleague Jeroen has also called in, so he was one of the researchers of the CRL. So he can always he can always add something to my answers, of course.
Yes, of course. In this case, we started from an existing site, so the building structure was already there. What we have done is to prepare the new installations for future changes in the energy distribution that we have on the campus. For example, by making sure that, for example, the heating system can work on lower temperatures, so that in the future, if the district heating on campus is lowered in temperature, that would be ready for that next step. So these are, of course, things that we took into account to make sure that also on that level it would be future-proof.
Yeah, thank you. Lauren also asked did you involve any of the students with new construction? Probably.
Yeah, we did some workshops during the process, actually, where some inner walls, for instance, were tested. And there some students were also involved. Actually, they were more involved in testing the mounting and demounting process. But I don't know if it was not really asking to the students if how they felt with the project, I think. Jeroen, but I think there was some feedback as well during that process.
Yeah, of course, what we asked the students to do is to test existing systems and see if they could go one step further with those systems. Each of those systems of the industrial partners that were involved had, of course, their strengths and their weaknesses. Some could be used in some contexts, and other were better fitted for other contexts. So we tried to get the maximum out of each of the products and systems that we explored, and try to just go one step further with it and show the industrial partners what they could possibly do with the system. So some would, example, be very good for mounting and demounting, and it was all right that they would have a very high level of environmental impact in terms of material. But then other products would not be demountable, but would have a very low environmental impact, which is also a good solution, for example, in walls that would not be transformed very often. So we try to identify for each type of product what situations would be optimal for them to be used.
Yeah, thank you. I also have an additional question from René. I'll read it out loud. Is the project a nice showcase project or preparing for new business activities?
Yeah, so both, I think. The main aim of the circular retrofit lab was mainly for testing the technical design principles and practice together with partners that are active in the practice as well, so not only research. But for new business activities, for example, new business models were not tested here. It was a part of the PAMP project, but I don't think in the CRL it was not tested. I don't know if there was some life cycle cost analysis done.
Yeah, we did do some LCA and LCC calculations, but what we did in a follow-up project was to take that group of partners, of industrial partners, and work on the second part of the puzzle, which is that business models. And we organized a learning network with them to look not only at the technical part, but also how they could commercially put those products and prototypes into the market. And we organized a lot of interactions with frontrunners, especially from Holland, who had already made some steps and restructured their organization to be able to do so.
Yeah, so you used the pilot project to make a follow-up project to see how you could scale up a certain products which were successful.
Yeah, we first had to demonstrate that it was actually possible and take away the argument of, look, nobody has done it yet, so we'll just wait until somebody tries to do it for the first time. So you need those first demonstration projects, those physical examples, just to make that statement. But then, of course, we know it's a much more systemic challenge that we are facing. So we're now more focusing with that group of stakeholders on the different aspects beyond the technical solutions.
Yeah, okay. I also have a question from Mark for you, Charlottte. How did you link the design decisions back to the different dimensions and goals of circularity?
Yeah. So yeah, this is the design decisions that I discussed here were also only related to the technical design principles of circular economy, so not to the other dimensions of circular economy. Earlier, we bundled these design principles in the publication, and all the 8 of the decisions that I discuss in this paper can be linked to at least one of them, of these design principles. So it's really the technical design principles. For example, the reversible connections and the easy accessible joints can be linked back to those design principles.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Then I have a final question, I think, for Stéphane. About the owners of the ACE retrofitting project. Did they live in apartment buildings?
Yes, it was all apartment buildings, yeah. And we mainly met with the co-owners, not the renters in those buildings, although there was quite a high number of renters in both of them. I think around 30% in France and 40% in Belgium, something like that. But we mainly met with the condominium board, the decision makers, so the owners.
Yeah, thank you. I think final question about the ACE project from Naomi. Before we get kicked out, how were the operating costs after retrofit in the ACE retrofitting project? Were the rents changed after retrofits? But I think there were no rental apartments, I think.
There were rental apartments, because sometimes you have owners who own an apartment but rent it out. Sometimes you have owners who own more apartments who live in one apartment in the building and who rent out the other ones. And sometimes the owners are completely absent. So there are multiple different options. Very often what we see is that rents could be increased, but also energy bills were a lot lower. So those were also part of the discussions, because you cannot just increase the rent. There are also legal rules for how much you can increase the rent for. But also this was part of the discussions, of all the discussions surrounding the finances, also for the owners. That owners said, well, we don't want to pay in the end more than we did before. So they said we can afford a certain amount of money to pay for these retrofits, but then our energy bills need to go down. So that was always part of the calculations.
Yeah. Thank you, Anne-Marie. I think we have to close the session. I want to thank everyone for their contributions, especially the presenters, of course, but also the people asking questions. And probably we'll see you in other sessions back again. Thank you all, and have a nice
Thank you all.
afternoon. Bye.
Thank you very much, Wendy.
Thanks, Wendy and René. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. René is frozen.